The invoice arrived on a Tuesday. A handwritten sheet of notebook paper, folded in thirds, slid under my apartment door at 7:14 in the morning. I know the time because my phone was in my hand when I heard it. I had been awake since 5, preparing for a deposition. I set my coffee down, picked up the paper, unfolded it, and read the number at the bottom. $1,500. Rent. Due by the 1st of the month. Signed by my mother-in-law, Renata. Stamped somehow with a little ink stamp of a house that she must have bought at a craft store. Underneath the number in her looping cursive. This apartment is family property. Contributions are expected. I stood in my kitchen in my robe, deposition note spread across the table, reading that sentence 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I needed to hold it still long enough to decide what it was. I am a paralegal. I have been one for 11 years. I work in real estate law. I spend my days reading deeds, title reports, encumbrance schedules, and promissory notes. I understand what property means in the legal sense, who holds it, who owes on it, what rights transfer and which ones do not. When Renata wrote family property on that invoice, she was using the word the way most people use it, loosely, emotionally, as a synonym for ours. She had not read the deed. I had. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New. The channel where quiet people keep the receipts and families learn that paperwork outlasts assumptions. If stories about dignity, documents, and the things people sign when they think no one is paying attention are what you're here for, drop a comment and subscribe. You're in the right place. I need to tell you about the apartment before I tell you what happened in it. My husband, Dmitry, and I had been married for 6 years when his father, Vasil, died. Vasil was a quiet man in the way that certain Eastern European men of his generation were quiet, not cold but economical. He showed love through action and contract, not through conversation. He had emigrated from Bulgaria in his late 20s, built a small plumbing business, and over the course of 30 years purchased 3 properties in our city. 2 were rental units. One was the apartment above the garage of the family home, a space he had finished himself, insulated and wired and drywalled over the course of 2 winters. Dmitry and I had lived there since the first year of our marriage. We paid no rent because Vasil refused it. He said it was for family. He said once over soup at Christmas that he liked having us close. That was all. We thanked him. We shoveled the driveway. We drove him to appointments. We showed up. Renata accepted our presence the way she accepted most things that benefited her. Without acknowledgement and without gratitude. She ran the household. She ran her children. She ran the narrative of the family with the efficiency of someone who had decided long ago that control was a form of love, and that love meant never having to ask. She had 2 children. Dmitry and his sister Marta. Marta lived 40 minutes away with her husband and their 3 children and visited on holidays and complained about the drive. Marta called her mother every day. Marta had opinions about everything and responsibilities for nothing. I cooked at family dinners. I organized Vasil's medical records. I translated documents when his English failed him. I drove Renata to her eye appointments when Marta had volleyball tournaments to attend. I did these things the way you do things in a family you've married into, quietly without invoice because you love someone and their people come with them. I didn't understand, then, that I was making deposits into an account that other people planned to withdraw from. Vasil died on a March morning, quietly, in his sleep. He had been sick for 8 months. The cancer was caught late. He handled it the same way he handled everything, with minimum words and maximum documentation. That last part matters. In the weeks after the funeral, while Renata accepted casseroles and Marta coordinated the social media tribute post, I did what I always do when I don't know what else to do with my hands. I organized. I filed. I sat with Vasil's papers. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just being useful in the only language I know. That was when I found the folder. It was a manila envelope rubber-banded shut, labeled in Vasil's handwriting, for Elena, open with attorney. My name specifically. Not Dmitry's. Not the family. Mine. I didn't open it. I put it in my bag, zipped it closed, and went and helped Renata find the good tablecloth for the reception. 3 days later, while Renata was at church and Dmitri was handling some of the business paperwork, I called the attorney whose number was printed on the card tucked inside the rubber band. His name was Gerald Harwick. He had been Vasil's attorney for 22 years. He said, "I've been expecting your call. He told me you'd be the one to find it. The handwritten invoice appeared 7 weeks after the funeral. I need you to understand the timeline here because timing is not incidental. It is the story. Vasil died in March. We buried him in the second week of that month. Gerald Harwick called me the following Tuesday to confirm a meeting. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. The invoice appeared on a Thursday, 4 days before my appointment with Gerald. Renata had not mentioned rent ever, in 6 years of us living in that apartment. Not once. Not a hint. Not a joke. Not a suggestion. Then Vasil was 7 weeks in the ground, and a piece of notebook paper appeared under my door. Picked it up. I read it. I photographed it with my phone timestamped geotagged. I set it on my desk next to my coffee. Then I took out a fresh legal pad and I wrote down, from memory, every conversation I could recall in which Renata had referenced the apartment, our living arrangement, or the concept of family property. There were 6. I dated them as precisely as I could. I noted who else had been present. Then I went back to the deposition I'd been preparing, and I did not say a word to Renata that day. This is the thing about working in legal documentation for 11 years. You learn that the first thing you say when you're surprised is almost always the thing that costs you the most. I was not going to say anything that would cost me. I was going to wait for Monday. Gerald Harwick's office smelled like old wood and good coffee. He was 70, methodical, the kind of attorney who still kept paper files in color-coded folders. He shook my hand, offered me a seat, and placed a manila folder on the desk between us. "Before I read anything," he said, "I want you to know that Vasil came to me 18 months ago. He knew then what the doctors confirmed 6 months later. He had time to be very deliberate." He opened the folder. The apartment above the garage, the one Dmitri and I had lived in for 6 years, the one Renata had now claimed as family property requiring a $1,500 monthly contribution, had been deeded to me specifically, not to Dmitri, not to both of us jointly, to Elena Petrova, my legal name solely. The deed had been recorded 14 months ago. It was filed with the county. It was legal, clean, and unambiguous. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Gerald let me. "He said you'd read it more than once," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me understand he had liked Vasil very much. The deed was the document, but the letter was the second thing. It was in a sealed envelope inside the folder, my name on the outside in Vasil's handwriting. Gerald slid it across the desk and gave me privacy. I unfolded 2 pages, handwritten, in the careful English Vasil had spent decades perfecting. He wrote that he had watched me for 6 years. He wrote that he knew what I had done without being asked. He wrote one line that I have not been able to shake since the moment I read it, and I will not share the whole of it here because it is mine, but the part one will tell you is this. A deed is just paper until someone earns it. You earned it. I sat in Gerald Harwick's office for a long time after that. My hands were very still on my lap. I looked at the deed. I looked at the letter. I looked at the rain starting outside the window. Then I picked up my phone and took a photograph of both documents. Time-stamped. Just in case. The thing about people who believe they are owed something is that they don't hide it well, once they've decided to collect. The week after my meeting with Gerald, Marta called me. She called, not Dmitri, me, to ask how we were thinking about handling the apartment going forward. She used the word we as though she were part of a conversation that had already happened. She mentioned that she and her husband had been discussing the possibility of using it as a weekend space. She mentioned that the kids would love having a place in the city. She mentioned, with a careful casualness that took some rehearsal, that she assumed Dmitri would want to keep things in the family. I asked her to say more about what she meant by in the family. She got quieter. She said she just meant that it would be a shame for anything to get complicated. She said Mom was already so upset. She said she hoped we could all just grieve together without making things harder than they needed to be. I thanked her for calling. I said I had a meeting in 10 minutes. I said goodbye. Then I went to the kitchen and I stood at the window for a while. 2 days later, Renata knocked on my door, the door of my apartment, in the early evening. She was dressed as if she'd been out. She held a small Tupperware of stuffed peppers, which she extended toward me with the specific body language of someone extending an offering rather than a gift. She said, "I heard you went to see Gerald Harwick." I said, "I did." She said, "He was your father-in-law's lawyer for a long time." I said, "He was." She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Elena, I think you understand that this apartment, everything here, it's family. Your family. But property is complicated when people grieve and make decisions they don't fully think through." She paused. Vasil was very sick. Sick people sometimes make choices that the whole family has to sort out together. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "Can you show me the deed?" She blinked. I said, "The deed to this apartment. If it's family property, you have a deed. Can you show it to me?" She said she would have to look for it. I said that was fine. I said I would see her soon. I closed the door. I waited until I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Then I called Gerald Harwick's office and left a message asking him to please send the notification letters we had discussed. If you have ever watched people who had no time for you suddenly develop a very urgent schedule the moment an estate enters the picture, if you know what it looks like when people start talking about what he would have wanted before the paperwork is even filed, then you already know where this is going. Stay with me. It gets very quiet, and then it gets very precise. The family meeting was Marta's idea. She framed it as a gathering. Dinner at the main house the following Sunday, to come together as a family during this difficult time. She sent a group message. She listed the food she was bringing. She used the word healing twice. I knew what it was. I had worked in legal offices long enough to recognize a settlement negotiation dressed as a casserole. I confirmed that I would attend. I prepared a folder. Gray letter size, the kind I keep in my office supply drawer. I put 4 documents inside it. I put the folder in my bag. I arrived at 6 o'clock. I brought wine. The table was already set. Marta's children were in the living room with tablets. Marta's husband, Gregor, was in the kitchen pretending to help. Renata was at the head of the table, which was her right, but she sat in a way that made clear she had been there for some time. Dmitri was beside me. He didn't know about the folder. Dinner was civilized for the first 40 minutes. Then Renata set down her fork. She said that she had been thinking, and she believed that the family needed to make some decisions together about the properties. She said that Vasil had been a generous man, sometimes too generous, and that generosity during illness was not always the same as clear intention. She said that she had spoken to her own attorney. She said this carefully, making sure I heard it, and that there were options for revisiting certain decisions made in the last year of Vasil's life. Marta nodded along. Gregor looked at his plate. Renata said she hoped we could handle this like a family, and not like strangers. She looked at me when she said it. I put my napkin on the table. I said I had a few things I wanted to share, if they were ready to hear them. Renata extended her hand as if granting me the floor. I opened the folder. The first document I placed on the table was the deed. I named it, the recorded deed to the apartment above the garage, filed with the county recorder's office 14 months ago, solely in my name. Renata looked at it. Her expression did not change exactly, but something in her face went still. I placed the second document beside it. The title search Gerald had run, confirming no liens, no encumbrances, no competing claims. Clean title. Marta said that Vasil hadn't been well. I said that the deed had been notarized, witnessed, and recorded 14 months before his death, during a period when his physician had documented full cognitive capacity. Marta said that didn't mean he wasn't being influenced. I looked at her. I said, "By whom?" She didn't answer. I placed the third document on the table, a printed copy of the relevant section of estate law in our state, with one paragraph highlighted. It addressed the legal standard for capacity and undue influence. I had highlighted the sentence that explained what it would require to challenge a validly recorded deed. I did not read it aloud. I let them read it themselves. Renata's voice when she spoke was tighter than before. She said that she was his wife. She said she had rights. She said that I had been living in that apartment on the family's goodwill, and that what Vasil had done was not fair to anyone else. I said, "He felt it was fair." Renata said, "You're not his daughter." The room went quiet. I said, "No, I'm not." I reached into the folder and placed the fourth item on the table. Not a document. A letter. 2 pages handwritten. Vasil's handwriting, which all of them recognized. His name at the bottom. I did not pass it around. I placed it where it could be seen. And I read one line from it, only one. A deed is just paper until someone earns it. You earned it. Marta's husband looked up from his plate for the first time. He looked at Marta. He looked at the letter. He looked at me. He said, "Marta, I think we should go." Marta said, "Gregor." He said, "I think we should go." Renata said in a voice that had lost some of its architecture, "This isn't what he would have wanted." I said, "He wrote down what he wanted. It's in that letter." She looked at me for a long time. I closed the folder, picked up my wine. I took a sip. Then I said very quietly, "Renata, I have lived above your garage for 6 years. I have shown up. You know I have shown up. I would have kept showing up. All I needed was for you to treat what was legally mine as if it were legally mine." I stood. "I hope you get some rest." I picked up my bag. I walked through the kitchen. Dmitri was 2 steps behind me. In the car he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You knew." I said, "I read everything 3 times." Gerald Harwick had already filed the appropriate notifications by the time the family dinner happened. The letters had gone out 4 days prior. Renata's attorney, whoever she had spoken to, would have already advised her that challenging a recorded deed under these circumstances would be expensive, slow, and almost certainly unsuccessful. She did not file a challenge. The invoice for $1,500 was never mentioned again. Not to me. Not to Dmitri. It was simply withdrawn the way invoices are withdrawn when the person handing them out realizes they have no legal standing on which to collect. The apartment is mine. The deed says so. The county recorder says so. Vasil said so, in the careful English he had spent decades perfecting. Marta and Gregor went quiet for several months. Gregor, I learned later through Dmitri, had been uncomfortable with the whole plan from the beginning. He had tried to talk Marta out of it. He came to our door 2 weeks after the dinner alone and said he was sorry. I offered him coffee. He sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes. I did not grant him absolution and I did not need him to ask for it. It was just 2 people, sitting quietly, acknowledging that something had happened. Renata. Renata is a harder shape to describe. She did not apologize. I did not expect her to. She is the kind of person who rewrites the story rather than examines it, and I have made my peace with the fact that in her version, something was taken from her. She is not entirely wrong that something changed. But what changed was not her property. What changed was the assumption that my compliance was permanent. Dmitri and I moved out of the apartment 6 months later. Not because of what happened, because we found a house we loved and the time was right. Before we left, I did one thing with the apartment. I renovated it. I spent 4 months and a number I will keep private converting it into a proper rental unit, new kitchen, new bathroom, refinished floors. Then I rented it to a young woman named Christina who is in her 2nd year of nursing school, and who, when she signed the lease, said she had never had a place that felt like hers before. I told her that I understood exactly what that felt like. The folder from the family dinner is in my desk drawer at home. The 4 documents are still in it, in order. The letter is inside a separate envelope, sealed, in the back of the drawer where I keep things that belong to me. I don't take it out often, but I know exactly where it is. And that, I think, is the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge wants the other person to keep suffering. Justice just wants the record to be accurate. Vasil was accurate. He documented everything. He sat with his attorney while he was sick and made sure that the person who had shown up would not be left holding air when the people who hadn't showed up finally got hungry. That is not sentiment. That is a recorded instrument filed with the county, 12 months before anyone needed to use it. He planned ahead. I am a paralegal. I count things for a living. I file things. I read things 3 times. He knew exactly who to leave the deed to. If this story reminded you that the things you do quietly, the meals, the drives, the appointments, the showing up when no one asked you to, those things are seen even when the people who should acknowledge them don't, then take that as yours. And if it reminded you that paperwork matters, that signatures matter, that a recorded deed outlasts a handwritten invoice every single time, make sure your own house is in order. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below.